Well, not yet, anyway. You're getting a second chance. Another throw of the dice.
They're after you. You're the prey in a deadly game. You must do anything to survive. Can you stop the hunt before you are taken down? Manhunt by Rockstar Games. Rated M for mature.
Okay, are you ready? Camera, action. We're filming something very special here tonight, and if we work together on this, we both get the big rewards, so get your shit together.
How's it going, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the All-Time Gaming Series. I'm your host, Steve Cravens, and joining me once again is my co-host, Andres Gallego, aka Galleghost. What's going on, buddy?
I'm doing quite well, you utter psycho. I'm ready to discuss this one.
Well, everybody, if you haven't figured out just by that alone, we're talking about Manhunt, which was released on November 19th, 2003. Andres, this is one of those games, it's rare. We talk about violent games a lot on this show. We've talked about Max. That's an understatement to say the least. We've talked about Metal Gear Solid. We've talked about Max Payne, GTA Vice City, Last of Us Part 2, Resident Evil 4. We've talked about tons and tons of violent games. I'm going to go ahead and say this. We're going to be talking about plenty of games in the future. We got a lot of games we want to discuss, a lot of games we're very passionate about. This will go down as the most violent and controversial game we will ever cover on this show. This game is notorious. It's infamous. Here we are, 19 years later. We're still talking about it. There's a couple pieces on it on YouTube. You go look at it in Wikipedia. You see the history of this game since its release. The places that it's been banned, the places that it tried to ban it. I mean, the censorship, even the censorship for the sequel because of the reaction to this game. Honestly, in all the years I've been playing video games, I have never seen anything like the reaction to Manhunt. And I remember it. I mean, I was only 14 years old, but I remember it very, very well. So let's get into it a little bit here, Andres. And we like to talk a little bit about the history of the game, how it kind of came to be, a little bit about the developers. Do you mind if I talk a little bit about Rockstar and where they were when this game started, and then we can kind of segue into like where we were when first time we played and stuff like that? Is that okay with you?
That's more than fine with me.
All right, awesome. So before we delve into the plot of the game, et cetera, and so forth, this is a Rockstar game. And Rockstar has since developed, I mean, listen, I'm going to get your opinion on this. There's several pillars of the gaming community, specifically for the consoles, that are, almost infallible. You and I have an incredible, we have raging hard-ons for Capcom and the Resident Evil games, the Resident Evil remakes we get, the Devil May Cry games. I mean, unfortunately, we haven't had anything good out of Konami for God knows how long, probably since they axed Kojima. But
sorry, who? Who again?
Yeah, precisely. But when they did have Kojima, they were turning out great stuff. Sony, to this day, Sony still puts out incredible games that we love. Square Enix.
Oh, yeah.
The Final Fantasy VII remake was a massive improvement to their legacy, because for a while there they had kind of faltered, but they're kind of back on top now. Rockstar is the king, as far as I'm concerned, of video game stories, voice acting, just multiplayer, just everything about Rockstar Games. When you play a Rockstar game, you are getting video game perfection. You are getting a Stanley Kubrick production. You're getting a David Fincher production. You're getting a James Cameron production. You're getting the work of a company that is obsessed with getting every single detail of their game absolutely right for the gamer to enjoy. And sometimes, sometimes when the game comes out, they're still working on patches. They're still working on cleaning up a few bugs and whatnot. They're constantly, polishing and shaving down their product, trying to get it exactly right for the gamer. Manhunt came out in 2003. So like we've discussed in the past, so Max Payne was a game that we talked about June of 2020, I guess, which is almost 2 years ago. But anyway,
We're only getting better, man.
we're not getting older, we're getting better. We said that in Resident Evil 4. I'm staying with it. So Max Payne is a Remedy game first and foremost. We got to make that absolutely clear. That is a Remedy game, as is the second game.
Yes.
But it was distributed by Rockstar.
Mhm.
Okay. GTA 3, which came out in 2001, and GTA Vice City, which came out in 2002, are Rockstar games.
Yeah.
And this is when Rockstar was really kind of leaving its imprint on the video game community, on the map. You know, when it was really kind of establishing itself as a true force with the other companies that we were mentioning, you know, like the Capcoms and the Konamis and at the time Squaresoft, you know, really kind of saying like, hey, you guys can make your work. We're going to give the gamers something that you guys don't give. You know, like Capcom, more of like a horror violence, Devil May Cry, Resident Evil, Dino Crisis, more animal versus man kind of thing. You know, and then obviously, you know, the Mega Man games are, there's no violence, there's just a lot of fun. But my point is, Rockstar was like, no, we're going to take over the top violence and we're going to give it to the gamer in ways they've never played it before.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Andres, we got GTA 3, we got GTA Vice City. Those are, again, parody / homages to the films that the developers of Rockstar absolutely loved, whether it be for GTA 3, whether it be, you know, Goodfellas, even the Sopranos to an extent with the voice cast that they got together. Heat in a couple ways here and there. GTA Vice City, obviously we've talked about this mess. Scarface, Miami Vice, Carlito's Way, like the Brian De Palma kind of, you know, crime movies. This was Rockstar's Manhunt. Was Rockstar's first attempt at going brutally realistic with its graphic violence. And
Yes.
that's what sets it apart from the Grand Theft Autos of the world. The Grand Theft Auto violence was brutal, yes, but it was over the top. And in the same way that Kill Bill, a movie like Kill Bill, or most of Tarantino's work, outside of maybe Reservoir Dogs, the brutality in a movie like Kill Bill is, yeah, it's tough, but it's over the top. It's stylish. And that's what I think about when I think about the Grand Theft Auto games. Manhunt is not like that. Manhunt is just like, yeah, it's brutal, it's dark, it's gritty. Go ahead.
No, and in fact, Manhunt, I would say, I would absolutely agree with you, where it's like, it's the first time we've taken the violence and turned it into a place of just pure, utter grimness, and to the point where even the presentation of the game reflects that, where this game had the balls to call out that whenever we killed somebody in a game, it was just kind of just like, you know, whatever, there are just pixels in there and stuff like that. Whereas this game sort of gave us the grimness and also the stakes that all these people that you were killing were all living, breathing people, because of the fact that when you performed any one of these executions, they didn't just die right away. The camera lingered on some of the kills, and then also it goes on for quite a bit too, where the point is this game is that it's supposed to be unnerving. It's supposed to distance the player away from just any connection to anything you could possibly have in this game, and it's all just brought to a level of like how you said with all the violence in all the other games.
Yeah,
those were all comedic and satirical, whereas this one puts it into a realm of blackness. There's an absolute lack of color and lack of joy to the violence that's going on in this. And that also even goes on to the presentation. This is the first time where I feel like I truly, truly played a snuff movie. And like you said, there is a little level of just, like you feel dirty after you played this game. Like you don't feel good. I mean, you feel satisfied at certain things that happen in terms of your experience with the game as a player, in terms of beating the game, but there's a certain part of you that feels dirty, for lack of a better word, after you've beaten this.
And it's, in that regard, it's also very unique as well, because I don't know if I'd call the game fun.
Mm-hmm.
It's an experience that I remember very vividly. A shocking experience. It's very, very, very unpleasant, but the gameplay itself was so compelling. The experience of it was so compelling that you were driven to keep going. And again, it's weird to say that it wasn't fun, because at the end of the day, a video game's purpose is to be fun. It's to be entertaining. But this was different. This game was very, very different. We haven't seen anything like this before or since, really, in terms of that, like you said, the grittiness, the griminess, that true, authentic snuff film feel that we've gotten in plenty of movies, but it's never been successfully translated to video games. It's a hell of an accomplishment in itself.
And sorry, and real quick, it truly felt like we were playing through a very gritty 1970s John Carpenter-esque film, where you were just like, oh man, like you're dropped into this like low-tech, lo-fi universe, but the atmosphere all the way through is so present and it's so unnerving, especially down to even the point where, like, you know, the game is presented in grain and it's presented with all these technical glitches all the way through, so that you feel that whatever it is that you're playing through, you feel that there is a groundness to it, and then you feel that there is a sense of an unfinished nature to it, a very gritty, unfinished nature to that aspect. So yeah, I mean, like just the way how the game is presented, it feels like an underground thing. It feels like something, even if you were 18 or 19 at the time, it feels like something that you were not supposed to play, and that just further leads into the dirtiness of it all, I think. So
it's something you shouldn't experience, like, you know, like something that you felt guilty experiencing. And I'm so glad you brought up John Carpenter, because obviously Rockstar has their cinematic influences when they do stuff. I was thinking, I was like, you know, my God, this game really is kind of like a late 70s, early 80s John Carpenter movie with a little Walter Hill in there too. And I think the reason why I'm thinking about Walter Hill is because he had a similar style to Carpenter, and also because 2 years after Manhunt came out, you got The Warriors, which came out in 2005, another Rockstar production. Warriors come out to play. This was a great game also. Another forgotten Rockstar classic. Mm-hmm. But since you brought up Carpenter and a little bit of that Walter Hill Warriors kind of stuff going on here, you mentioned snuff film, and you mentioned gritty, grimy, I shouldn't be playing this. In that way, thinking about it right now live with you, like talking about this, it also kind of, in many ways, feels like the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, where that felt like a snuff film, like someone just happened to find a 16mm print of people getting slaughtered and diced, and you're seeing something that you shouldn't see. You're experiencing something that you shouldn't see, like the sadistic maniacs wreaking havoc. It's kind of amazing that it really is kind of like a grindhouse 1970s kind of experience. And again, I'm kind of ashamed to say it, I never played Manhunt 2, but from Manhunt, I've never had this kind of experience after playing this game. In all the games I've played since then, I've never had a similar experience to Manhunt.
No, and in fact, I played through the original version, no, not the original version, but I played through the censored version of Manhunt 2, because that game even fell into its own controversy. Even before it came out, it was the first game in history to get an AO rating, and an AO rating is your game is just not coming out, and no publisher will release an AO game, and also no system will allow you to publish an AO game. So when that game came out, it was heavily censored. As gritty and as staticky as the kills were in the first Manhunt, it was even more so in the sequel, to the point where I think kind of the grittiness even led to it being a little more uncomfortable at certain points. Like you felt like you were missing some stuff, but certain things, the static actually helped emphasize even more and left more of the imagination in your brain. But it didn't compare in any way to the first Manhunt in terms of just what you see in front of you is what you're getting. And even still this day, like, I can't think of a single game that's even come anywhere near as close to just the utter, I mean, I'm at a loss for words as to describe it, but just the utter depravity of what Manhunt 1 was.
Yeah, I mean, and again, we were talking about, you know, Rockstar and like kind of them putting their imprint. I mean, they were no strangers to controversy. I mean, like, again, GTA 3 had its controversy, Vice City had its controversy, Bully had its controversy. And here's one that people might have forgotten about: State of Emergency.
Yeah.
I mean, they were pushing the envelope all over the place.
Yeah, and with a company like Rockstar, like, you know, they sort of kind of established themselves as sort of like, this is what the adults only section of video gaming looks like. This is what the section of the games that look like where they're clearly only aimed at the adults. They're clearly aimed at the more mature audiences. And at a time where, you know, there was Nintendo and the console war was happening, you had to make stuff palatable between all different quadrants of gaming. And that's what I think led to the success of Rockstar with Grand Theft Auto, because Grand Theft Auto, that's made purely for adults. And that gave you an experience that you really didn't find anywhere else at the time. And then also for a brand like Rockstar that needed to establish themselves, Manhunt was just another way for them to go, this is something you're not going to get with any other studio, guys. And we're giving you a definitive experience. And we're also giving you, like you said, where people get like, oh, top tier talent. With this, I mean, you told me this right before I got in, but John Bernthal was apparently one of the mocap actors in this game. And then getting a vocal talent like Brian Cox on board as well too. You know, I believe he got so many accolades way back when in the day, and he's very popular for numerous roles, but especially back then, he was popular for being Colonel William Stryker in the X2 movie. So, well,
he was on a hot streak, because remember, it was Stryker in X2 in 2003. He was in The Ring in 2002, and then he was in Troy in 2004. Oh
yeah,
and then he was also in The Bourne Identity in 2002, Bourne Supremacy in 2004. So in that like little, like 2-year section right there, 2002 to 2004, you know, he was kind of all over the place in cinema screens, man. I mean, that's a lot. Those are very, very popular movies. The 2 Bourne films, X-Men, Troy, The Ring. I mean, those are some pretty big movies. And to have his voice be lent to the game gave it like a kind of a legitimacy. You know what I mean? Like kind of like gave it like the next level kind of tier of talent working on it.
Yeah, no. Plus, I also feel to a certain extent that Brian Cox, whenever someone offered him the role for this, they just told him the game is called Manhunt, and he's probably just like, well, I was in the movie called Manhunter. Of course, I have to do this.
And remember, Rockstar at this time was getting some serious talent to voice their games for them with the Grand Theft Auto 3, and especially with Grand Theft Auto Vice City. It would carry over into San Andreas, which was 2004. So they were already kind of like, I mean, they, as the great John Hammond would say, spared no expense. So why don't we talk a little bit about the plot, because I mean there is a lot to talk about this game, and I want to get to the fun stuff about the game. And for those of you watching the video who are curious about the controversies behind it, and you know, the game being banned, and you know, the unfortunate murder case that this game kind of got looped in the UK in 2004, we'll talk about that towards the end. But for right now, let's have some fun. Let's talk about the game itself. Some of you might actually be watching this and have a little bit of curiosity about the plot of the game. And why it's so violent, and why we're talking about snuff films and whatnot. Andres, why don't you help them out and give them a little rundown of the plot, if you don't mind?
All right. Well, we follow the character of James Earl Cash, which I love the little play on words where you're borrowing from so many different criminals throughout all history. But you're following James Earl Cash, who is a death row inmate who has been put on death row for over 3 years, and you find out that on the night of his execution, the execution gets botched, and actually he wakes up and finds himself being yelled at by this omniscient director voice played by Brian Cox. And he finds out that instead of his execution happening, he's being forced to participate in these snuff films and in this rigor of hiding from all these gangs that are all paid by the director to hunt you down, and to be in these series of snuff films that are titled Manhunt. And also on top of that, there is a reporter that's sniffing on the case of this character, the director character Starkweather, and sort of uncovering this mystery and also this conspiracy in terms of the corruption between the police and between Starkweather's underground manhunt ring. And you're sort of just caught in the middle between all of that in terms of just all these people being paid to hunt you down, and then also just being driven into all sorts of different really, really creepy locations. I mean, starting from the freaking the junkyard, leading all the way over to a abandoned insane asylum, and then also just I spoke about it very quickly, but the different levels of gangs that are in this as well is just also mind-blowingly creepy. But that's where the game sets up, and that's where the entire thing just takes off, I think.
And, so this is very much a stealth horror game. It is very much a psychological horror game, brutal. I mean, very, very, very brutal. Again, like the more graphic the kills are, the higher rewarded you pretty much are, essentially. Let's think about this for a second. James Earl Cash, we don't know what he's done. We don't know if he's a serial killer. We don't know if he's a hitman. We don't know what he's done to get 3 years on death row. But obviously, if you're on death row and you're about to be executed, chances are you didn't do anything good. And the odds are, you've done several things which are considered heinous. So that alone, right there, makes this game very unique. Grand Theft Auto, you play as gangsters. You play as, hitmen, whatever, and there's always a personality to it. There is no personality to Cash.
No.
You are a soulless abyss of a human being, and you're essentially, as the gamer, playing as a depraved serial killer or just a flat-out lunatic going around killing other lunatics. That in itself is kind of like, my God, we had never seen anything like that in games before. Yeah, we've been, you might have the experience of playing as a bad guy here and there, but to be your main playable character, have that be your background in itself, to put you in that killer mindset of what it's like to sneak up and brutally eviscerate people is incredibly unnerving in itself.
Yeah.
And again, a very unique aspect to this game, which added to the controversy behind it. And, the fact that, as the gamer, you do kind of revel in the killings. You do kind of revel in the brutality of what you're doing, because you take solace in the fact of the guys that you're killing, they're no babes in the woods either. So it's evil disposing of evil, and you're having a good time at it, but you got to kind of keep in mind that, you're not a good guy. This is not good versus evil. This is evil versus evil. It's very, very unique.
Yeah, evil versus evil, and then also this is one of those games that it truly made me feel kind of bad for some of the people that I was killing off, because either they are evil or they are very mentally unstable. And it sort of presents you with that notion of who am I to be sort of doing this and delving this much just utter inhumanity to all these other people? I mean, it truly calls into question the morality tale behind it. I mean, you have no choice but to do so, because you have a raving lunatic buzzing in your ear, basically saying, if you don't do what he says, he's going to make sure that he's going to call every single one of these people to your location and tell them where they are so that they can just get done with you right away.
Yeah. And also, again, we mentioned this stuff. So if that wasn't enough, everything that you're doing is being filmed.
Yeah.
In its own cinematic, pornographic kind of way, as a snuff film. Mm-hmm. So all these murders that you're doing, all these decapitations and stabbings and beatdowns, I mean, it's all being filmed to be sold to the highest bidder, to some creep somewhere who's paying a lot of money to watch people get, brutally murdered.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not gonna lie, I actually kind of feel kind of dirty talking about it. Because at the end of the day, I was fucking 14 years old when I played this shit, man. There was no way I should have been playing this shit. You shouldn't be playing it at 19 years old.
Yeah, no, I remember it just came out on the PS4 in terms of the classics, the PS2 classics editions that the PlayStation Network would put out. And I remember replaying it and being like, man, this is this is ungodly brutal still to this day. Like, I don't even know if today, if I have kids, if I'm even going to let them even play this not even until they're 17 or 18, not even ever by this point. I mean, because that also leads into just what the controversy behind this was, is that we never seen a game this brutal, and we had never seen a game. I mean, at that point, I'd never seen a game get the moniker of the murder simulator. And honestly, there's so many games out there that get monikers of like, oh, the cop killing video game. Oh, this. It's like, yeah, you can kill cops in the game, but this is like one of those like very, very rare times where like whenever they get a moniker and they gave this one the murder simulator, I'm like, yeah, because pretty much
kind of accurate.
Yeah, it's kind of accurate because the game is all about all the different ways you dispose of certain people, and the game not only rewards you for it, but it also encourages you to do so. And then also, let's be honest, there is also a morbid curiosity seeing what those executions look like. Like, they give you a plastic bag and you're like, all right, I wonder how that's going to turn out as an execution. I wonder what level red of that looks like. And then you watch it and you're like, oh, God, you could do that with a plastic bag? Holy crap.
And then you got like the standard that you got like the baseball bats, you got like the barbed wire, you got like the hooks, you got like all this, you know, there's plenty of things to work your magic on. The atmosphere itself also lends to that dirty, because it's obviously, you know, thematically it's very dark, but visually it's very dark. It's, you know, it's almost like a nightmare.
Yeah.
Like you know, we mentioned him briefly in our video for Hannibal last year, but it's almost kind of like you're playing through like a Francis Bacon kind of painting, like filled with pain and agony and rage and violence. I'm sure if Francis Bacon heard me comparing a video game to his masterpieces, he'd probably turn over in his grave. But you know, but seriously though, in its own way, it does have a resemblance to what he achieved with his art. And I'm not saying that Manhunt is art or anything like that. I'm simply saying that it achieved a goal to make the gamer feel a certain way, just like, you know, Francis Bacon's paintings, or, you know, certain filmmakers or musicians or sculptors, whatever. Artists go out of their way to make their audience feel a certain way. Mm-hmm. And Rockstar succeeded in creating this nightmarish hellscape that you play through as this, you know, serial killer, you know, assassin, whatever he is. And think about it, in most games, occasionally you might have like a sidekick of some sort, you know, like someone to kind of take the edge off a little bit, other characters to kind of like, you know, mingle with, and kind of like, you know, maybe there's some comedic relief or something like that. The only comedic relief we have is like, you know, Brian Cox talking shit to you over your earpiece. Other than that, it's like you are alone, surrounded by these freaking demons and monsters around you. And of course, like the only way to get through it is to go through them in the most brutal, vicious ways possible. It's you know, I question whether or not we should be talking about this game, because it was like, you know, should we really glorify a game that makes you feel this way, that has such gratuitous violence? The answer is yeah, because the very few games have ever come close to having the balls to really show you violence as, some people might say it's gratuitous. Violence is supposed to be shocking. It's supposed to be disgusting. It's supposed to be off-putting. And video games, by their very nature, go out and try to make it as stylish and fun and kind of, you know, filled with testosterone as possible to make it, you know, exciting. Mm-hmm. It's not exciting in here. It is gross. It is tough. It is, you know, in your face and abrasive that the way it is in real life. Yeah. And yes, the graphics have been dated a little bit, but let's put it to you this way. When this game came out, the graphics were, I don't want to say they were like Metal Gear Solid 2 or Final Fantasy X levels, but they were still good enough where, you know, you got the gist. You got the gist, and then also just the audio quality in terms of just how they execute certain things, and like, you know, just hearing like the bat coming in contact with the head, or just even the gargles of blood as the people are dying, as you're strangling them or as you're doing something, like the death cries as well too. Like there's one in particular where, like, I know when you have the glass shard, like you just hear, like, you've never heard like death cries in a game quite like that. Like you almost felt like,
holy crap, was someone getting murdered when they actually shot the recordings of this? Like it like you said, it doesn't necessarily glorify the violence. In fact, the violence, I think, is made to be as abrasive and to be as realistic as possible, so that you as the player know, oh my God, this is terrible. I don't ever want to do this to anybody whatsoever.
It's no joke. It's no joke.
It's no joke, but what this level of violence does is that in the beginning, you sort of feel like you're killing off all these like random people, that when you get to the very end of the game, where you are truly facing against all the folks that have put you in this situation and that have controlled the situation, and you're going from being uncomfortable to being like, yeah, get it, take them out. And then it's very interesting that a game like something like, let's say, Joker, leads the audience into that level where you're actually cheering for the blood and you're actually cheering for the gore by the very end, because no matter what you dealt to anybody, or no matter how much of a piece of garbage you are making sure the garbage that started this off and that put you in this situation is done. And that is something that not a lot of games have done since then, I truly feel. And
it's very subversive. Yeah,
it's very subversive, and it's also just very much into putting you into this man's perception. You know what? It's you could call it a question whether or not it should be applauded. You have to understand. You have to at least tip your cap to the level that this game was on, or just what it was trying to do to the player at the time, because not a lot of games have the courage to do this, especially. So yeah.
With what you're saying there towards the end of the game, when you go after the people responsible for putting you in this situation, I can see why, some people would be very, very upset with that, because it does achieve that goal of putting you in that mindset saying, oh, I'm going to rip you guys to shreds. I've been ripping gang members to shreds this entire game. Mm-hmm. They might be monsters. They haven't done anything to me, but you fuckers did something to me. So I'm going to do everything I can to make you suffer. To put you into that like bloodthirsty mindset. Yeah, it absolutely is subversive 100%. Mm-hmm. And very, very unique. I think the last game, honestly, to do something like this is one that we talked about not too long ago, which is Last of Us Part 2.
Oh yeah.
So that is, that's when you know you're in the hand. I listen, and for those of you that are still kind of shitting on Last of Us Part 2 for being like woke or whatever the fuck it is, at the end of the day, it really succeeded in pushing your buttons. For those of us who appreciate the game for what it is, which is, in my opinion, and your opinion, I think, a masterpiece.
Oh yeah.
The reason why it's a masterpiece is not only the graphics and all that stuff, but because it put you into the mindset of Abby and Ellie. And that's what the best video games do. They put you in the mindset of the main characters that you're playing as. All the great games have done it. Every single great video game that has stood the test of time has made you not only invested in the characters, but literally opened up the character's head, put you in there, looking out the eyes, and making you feel everything that they're feeling. And absolutely. We feel that with Cash in this game, absolutely. Do you want to talk about the gangs a little bit? I know you were kind of jumping at the bit to talk about the gangs.
Oh my God. All right. Well, the various gangs that are in this game, just to clarify a little more, the director, Starkweather, has hired all these various gangs throughout the city to basically go out and chase you. And he's put together a really, really diverse and colorful cast of characters that go after you. I mean, we've got one of my personal favorites to take down is the Skins, the white supremacists that basically you were just like, oh, you know what? I'm totally fine taking you guys out. That's totally fine. But then you also have like the really sort of off kilter gang of the Hoods as well too, which they are actually kind of terrifying when you see them walking out and about and stuff like that. And then you sort of hear the chatter. They're like, man, as soon as we get this guy, we're done. All right. As soon as we get this guy, we can go home and all this other stuff. Then that also leads to sort of the question of, are these guys actually gangs, or is Starkweather dressing up all these actors and paying them off to act as crazy as you possibly can? That's left to your imagination. But just in terms of just the more craziness that go on, I know this one's your personal favorite as well too, the Smileys. For various reasons, yeah. I was telling them before the show, it's so surreal that we're talking about this game now, because last year
For those of you who don't know, the Smileys are loosely based on John Wayne Gacy, the killer clown. And last year, a Peacock documentary came out, which was excellent. John Wayne Gacy, Devil in Disguise. And then just a couple days ago, Netflix put out their second Conversations with a Killer. The first one was for Ted Bundy, and this one's for John Wayne Gacy. So I was like, God, how crazy! We're talking about this game, and that gang is actually based on John Wayne Gacy, the killer clown. Which makes it, all the more kind of like gross. Like we're basing a gang off of John Wayne Gacy. It's funny because we talk about Rockstar having these influences from movies that came out in the past. I'll be damned if James DeMonaco didn't have any inspiration for the Purge movies from this particular game, with all the different gangs that he has in the Purge games. Because I saw the Purge movies, they kind of made me think, especially when you get to like Purge, the Purge Anarchy and all these things where you have like all these different maniacs who are dressed up a certain way. Yeah. And you kind of like have to survive the night, as it were, and it's either kill or be killed. That really reminded me of the gangs you see in Manhunt. So, and again, that leads to another aspect of the game that makes it even more terrifying. Not just the fact that you're playing as a psycho, but like there is the complexity. Like you said, listen, most of the gangs are clear-cut psychopaths, bloodthirsty psychopaths, no question about it. But there are some in there, when you listen to the voice acting going through, like, you do wonder, are they really bloodthirsty psychopaths, or are they people that maybe got on the wrong side of Starkweather that need to do this to get out of his debt, as it were? Mm-hmm. We don't know. So that lends another disturbing aspect to it, that you could be possibly killing good people that unfortunately fell onto the wrong side of Starkweather. But he is the main villain of the piece, regardless of all these gangs we're talking about here, all these colorful, maniacal gangs. He is the villain, and he's one of the most underrated villains in video game history.
Just his vocal performance all the way through is, like you said, it grounds the game in terms of just you being like, you know what? There is a level to where I'm like, I don't want to be doing this anymore. But then the minute that you start doing some of these executions, or you don't do enough, Brian Cox's Starkweather would just come out and just be like, listen, if you don't want to play anymore, I can just tell these gangs where you are. And I'm like, oh my God. And then when you start progressing even further with the executions and you start getting into levels of red and levels of yellow and all that other stuff, Brian Cox has a way of telling a certain joke that is very, very off kilter and sort of just like, oh my God, I can't believe I laughed at that. Like he's sadistic and he's depraved in the best way possible. And he's a character that the more you play with him buzzing in your ear, the more you grow to not only hate him, but love to hate him, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely, 100%. And I'll go ahead and say this. We say this a lot about movie stars that play certain roles here and there, movie directors make certain movies here and there. I could never imagine another director making that movie. I could never imagine another actor playing that role. I could never imagine another voice actor playing Starkweather. Could not do it. Could not do it. And his dry delivery of some of the lines, and then he also has deliveries where he's having fun with it too. It's one of those great all-time voice acting performances for video games that just doesn't get enough credit.
Oh yeah, and even to a certain extent, you almost feel like Starkweather, like whenever you do some of these executions, he feels very happy with you, but then also if you keep doing back-to-back red executions, like the highest level over and over again, you start hearing that he's not only getting a sense of joy from this, but there's an insinuation that he might be getting off on this as well too, and that makes it even more uncomfortable to where you're murdering these people. You're like, oh my God, is this guy like pleasuring himself while I'm murdering all these people, and while I'm having a terrible time hiding as maniacs are roaming around looking for me? I'm like, oh God. It leads to even more putting you in that perspective of James Earl Cash. And Brian Cox, I thought, was the perfect foil for this character in terms of just being a blank slate. Here's a character that's so over the top, that throws fits if you don't do enough, and that almost turns into a child at certain points. He just goes into like a manic rage and just says whatever the hell he wants. It's, again, like you said, it is a very underrated performance in video game history.
if for those of you watching who never really played the game and you're just kind of listening to us talk about it, if we're still not being clear with you what it's like playing this game, imagine Charles Manson had set up security cameras everywhere, Pelco cameras everywhere, GoPros, drones, what have you.
Yeah.
And he set loose Ted Bundy or, Richard Ramirez upon, the Bloods and Crips and whatever other gangs are in LA and just was watching them on all these cameras, watching Bundy, watching Ramirez just rip these guys to shreds. If that doesn't make you feel uncomfortable, then congratulations, you're officially a demented psychopath. You should seek help.
You're really doing it for me. I ain't been this turned on since... Well, let's not go there.
So we've talked about the game. We've talked about how much it is fun. We've talked about how demented it is, and I want to talk about something a little bit more substantial with the game. If you don't know, this game had a massive amount of controversy that came with it.
Oh, yeah.
It was banned in several countries. It was banned in New Zealand, banned in Australia. Was apparently banned in the UK after a murder case that happened. I'm not going to say the people's names or whatnot, but it involved a couple teenagers. A teenager was murdered by his friend, and the parents blamed the video game Manhunt because it was in the room, I guess, and they thought that the friend who committed the murder was inspired by the video game, and how the video game essentially inspires your greatest bloodlust, inspires you to seek the animal within you to murder people. Turned out that the game belonged to their son, and it turned out that the murder was actually drug related. It had nothing to do with the game. So, Rockstar escaped, some serious trouble there. But all the same, a lot of countries either outright banned the game or they made it, virtually impossible to get access to it by making it adults only or whatever. We talked about this on Natural Born Killers. We did a retrospective for Natural Born Killers not too long ago, and we got into the topic of censorship and when it comes to blaming art or the artist for inspiring violence in others. Anders, I'm pro freedom of speech. I'm pro freedom of expression. I hate censorship. I absolutely loathe it. Obviously, the game has a right to exist. You don't have to play it if you don't want to. You certainly don't have to let your kids play it. The game has a right to exist, and I'm so tired of people blaming video games, blaming movies, blaming music for heinous crimes, heinous behavior. At the end of the day, the real issue here, in this case, it was drug related. Unfortunately, in the drug world, when it comes to drug dealing and supplying and whatnot, violence tends to follow. The real issue here, more often than not, is mental health.
Yeah.
And not being able to address it for some people, people not seeing warning signs and whatnot. I am so glad that Rockstar escaped from this unscathed, because we played the most violent video games ever made. Our generation was exposed to some really, really hardcore shit. We turned out okay. We're not going around shooting anybody. We're not going around, we're not in the cocaine business. We're not, we're not hitmen. We're not serial killers. We're not this stuff. And it just really, I do believe there is a point where people can be inspired directly to commit violence, to commit terror. I'm not for that. I know I said I'm freedom of speech, freedom of expression, right up until you're directly influencing and inspiring people to go out and murder others. This game did not do that. Mm-hmm. It did not tell the gamers, you've got to go out and do these things. Mm-hmm. If anything, this game was showing you that violence was not a fucking joke. It was not something that was fun. It was not something to be reveled in. It's something that should take a toll on you and be off-putting. We mentioned it earlier. I'm just wondering where you line up on this debate.
I'm pretty much in the same boat as you are, because the thing is, like I said, this game, in terms of the presentation, it is very abrasive. It's not supposed to be it's not supposed to take the killing lightly. Like, you look at another game that got similar controversy, but no one bothered to play and no one cared, was Postal. But Postal, you were playing the role of a mailman, and the goal was to kill everybody, but it was done in a way where, you go out into the world and you mow down tons of innocent people out on the road or just wherever you come across. And that is where the game not only rewards you, but it also encourages you to keep going on. And that I find to be truly just one of those things where it's like, that I can't get behind, because you're just stirring up controversy just to stir up controversy. Whereas with this game, it was definitely controversial and it was definitely trying to press buttons, but the button that it was trying to press was like, take your emotional temperature to a certain extent. You don't want to, like, it made me know for certain that like the killing in these type of games, that it is very uncomfortable, and it is one of those games that, you know what, you shouldn't want to go back and play it over and over and over again. I mean, probably the only reason why I keep going back for it is Brian Cox's dialogue and Brian Cox's just performance in it. It's oddly sadistic, but then also on top of that, whenever I get to the killing part of it, that pretty much makes me about as uncomfortable as it should. But the thing is, it is intended to do that. And for a company like Rockstar to be able to make you have an adverse reaction to violence in that way, you have to sort of give them a little bit of credit on that one. Whereas the whole debate about whether or not violence inspires violence, I just feel that it is our right as a society to have mental health awareness and to have access to various forms of mental health wellness just at your fingertips, because truly in those cases, or in any other cases where people say they're inspired by video games or something like that, it is not the responsibility of the artist to basically just say, because I did this, am I directly responsible? If somebody is going to do something and they want to blame it on something, they will find a way to blame it. I mean, someone blamed Arnold Schwarzenegger back in the 1990s for for having a massive sodium overload, because he basically ate peanuts to the point where he basically had like a really bad like a blood condition in sodium and all this other stuff. And he blamed Arnold Schwarzenegger on it because Arnold Schwarzenegger said, go eat peanuts if you want to gain weight, which he did gain weight. But, was it Arnold Schwarzenegger's responsibility for that? No. And then also on top of that, you look at any other movies. Is Pan's Labyrinth going to inspire all these kids to basically just start going underneath trees, looking for fairylands and all this other stuff? No. Is Spider-Man going to be blamed for all these kids going up to freaking dangerous arachnids and trying to get bit, hopefully getting those spider powers?
There's always one that will probably that, there's always one. But you're making an excellent point. Now I want to really make a point here. And really kind of drive this home just in case I haven't already. Odds are that if someone were to play this game and get inspired to kill someone, which is not the case, let's say it were to happen, the odds are you had already been thinking about killing someone for a while up to this point. Yeah. Why I say this is because I heard a story once. We're talking about serial killers here. We're talking about these games. We mentioned John Wayne Gacy. I mentioned Bundy a little bit. Let's talk about Ted Bundy for a second. Allegedly, Ted Bundy in 1974 went to go see Black Christmas. Okay. The opening scene of Black Christmas, for those of you who haven't seen it, the original from 74, is a first-person long shot of the killer's POV going into a sorority house. Okay. And very impressive too, about climbing up the ladder and then looking into the window. For a while there, I couldn't even figure out how they did it. Apparently, Bundy was inspired by that when he committed the Chi Omega murders at FSU. When he snuck into the sorority house and he killed Margaret Bowman and Lisa Levy, and he brutally beat the other two girls that he thought he killed, but they were still alive. In terms of how he snuck into the house in the dead of night with the piece of wood and just went to town on him. Okay, they claims that the movie inspired him to do it, or gave him the idea to do that. When he saw this movie, apparently he already had 6 or 7 victims that he had killed in Seattle.
Yeah.
The guy was already a maniac. The guy was already a piece of shit that had raped, murdered, beheaded. He was a necrophiliac. He had sex with their bodies in the woods. This guy was already just a worthless piece of shit, no good to society. So my point is that this guy was clearly, forget about being mentally ill. This guy was evil. This guy's evil. His evil already existed. And he just happens to see a movie that gives him an idea that he enacted on 4 years later. You can't blame the movie for that. It's not the movie's fault that the wrong guy saw the movie. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like it wouldn't be the game's fault that the wrong kid played the game, especially if he's already got a history of this shit. If he's got likes to bully kids or hurt small animals or whatever the case. It's mental illness. That's what you need as parents. Your job when they're up until they're 18 and even beyond then, but especially they're under 18. Your job as parents is to watch out for your kid and pay attention to any warning signs whatsoever that they might be a danger to themselves and to others. Don't blame the video games, okay? Plenty of us have played video games like this and came out absolutely fine. We don't have violent tendencies. We're not going out killing anybody, robbing banks, anything. Like, we're not doing any of this shit. Yeah. So this is fault on art, and I consider video games to be art.
Absolutely, art, so do I. Yeah.
Yeah, and art has a right to exist and has a right to be interpreted by the audience, the viewer, however, in a certain way. And I don't think artists should be censored. I don't believe in censorship. I don't. And again, unless it truly, truly does lead to, hate or violence. This game is not the issue here. Mm-hmm. Anyway.
More the issue is more just the kind of folk that will take credence from this and take the wrong message, which is, violence is not supposed to be something that's fun. It's supposed to be something that is terrible, and it's supposed to be something that is supposed to put you on edge. And I think that the game, it's not the game's fault. I think it's just the reading of the game. It entirely depends on the viewer, and that's something that art itself cannot control. I think the one reason why this gets as much flack as it does is because it is an interactive medium. Like, you could watch RoboCop mowing down tons of people, or you could watch Jason, Michael Myers, and all this other stuff. But the thing is, it's a very passive experience, whereas with this game, you are an active participant in it in the sense that you are pressing that button every time.
Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting. It's always been fascinating to me, the people that try to blame movies. These psychos, they're always looking for an excuse. They're always looking for someone to blame. You know what I mean?
Well, you look at all history, and then you can even just see that, people were blaming violent books on stuff that was happening for over a century.
Oh, yeah.
People were blaming comic books for the downfall of society in the 30s, the 40s, and the 50s. And then people were blaming violent movies in the 80s. And then people were blaming video games in the 90s. It's just going to come in depending on the medium, and it's not necessarily up to the artist to sort of tell what we can or can't see. It is basically just up to the person in general to have that right mind frame to go right in and play, to go into this game and get the right message out of it. And if they went into this and they got the completely wrong thing, that's not the game's fault at all. And in fact, I think the game goes out of its way to show you that every single thing that you're doing in this is not supposed to happen, and that it's following the basic mechanics of a video game, which is, if you want to progress, you have to do this no matter what. You look at a game like Metal Gear Solid, you have no choice but to murder the bosses for the most part. And in what's called in hell, even Super Mario, you are forced to take down all these Goombas. And, because of the fact that it's a colorful cartoon character type of thing, nobody really looks at it that way. But it's one of those things where, again, you present this as an ultra realistic and ultra grimy take on what violence is. It's going to be controversial no matter which side of the pole you fall in on.
Yeah, I agree. So that's going to do it for us today here at High Voltage Media and the all-time gaming series. We've covered a lot of ground with the game. At the end of the day, you can watch us talking about it, and you can see our enthusiasm for it. Unfortunately, though, I really do think that if you had never played this game, you'll never truly understand what it was like to experience this for the first time back in 03, 04.
Oh yeah.
And to really just kind of experience something that we had never seen anything like this before.
No.
And it's a shame that more people can't play it the way you could on PS2. I mean, it is available on PS4, right?
Yeah, it is. The problem is it's very janky if you play that PS4 version on the PS5. And frankly, this is one of those games where I don't see Rockstar necessarily fixing that version until we get maybe another port of it at some point. But having said that, it is one of those games that I've gone back to and played every now and again. It's not, again, there's certain aspects of this game that you can respect, like the stealth aspect of it, I think is very innovative in terms of using the shadows and in terms of using the environment, and also in terms of using the sound effects to your advantage as well, too. It is truly a very groundbreaking game in a lot of places, but the problem is that the gore and the violence take center stage in this, and that's the point of it entirely. And sort of the gameplay kind of comes second, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, and actually, this game actually was responsible for a near mutiny at the Rockstar headquarters, actually.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, a lot of people, apparently wanted to quit working on the game because they were so uncomfortable with the stuff that they were, rendering and developing. So, that's interesting for a gaming company that's notorious for its violence. It's, I think when you're talking about Rockstar Games, the one word that comes to mind is success.
Yes.
Everything. Like excessive language and sex and the violence and the drug use and just everything is just so wildly over the top that to think that a game could inspire a near mutiny in the offices for people who had worked on the games, some games previous, to say, hey, we're not comfortable making this. We don't really want to have anything to do with it. That should speak volumes to just how depraved the game really is. And I mean that in the best way possible.
Oh, yeah. It's truly groundbreaking and truly unlike anything we have played since, or I don't think we'll ever get an experience like playing Manhunt all over again. I mean, we have to go into a very sick and depraved place before I think we'll have an experience like that again. And it's been over 19 years by this point. So
absolutely crazy.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, and I want you to imagine something right now.
Mm-hmm.
Rockstar doesn't do remakes. If they remade Manhunt with Red Dead Redemption 2 graphics, then you would really start grasping just how horrendous what you saw in 2003 really was. Because
oh yeah,
there's no way you could do a remake of this game. With how great graphics are, no one would ever approve it. It would be banned. It's just too close to home. It's too real. It's really one of a kind. And here we are. We're 19 years later. We're still talking about it. Not in the same way we talked about Metal Gear Solid or Max Payne, because again, those games, as violent as they were and as dark as they were, there were other aspects to the games, Metal Gear Solid, Max Payne, both, that superseded the violence that was in each of them. Like the slow-mo gunplay of Max Payne or the boss fights of Metal Gear Solid, like you brought up. There's other aspects of the game that were so mind-blowing at the time. We focused more on that rather than the bloody violence that came, with the game and the action beats. This, like you said, we are focusing strictly on it because it's so overwhelming.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it the game that it is, man. I mean, that's...
Yeah, and all those other games, they were selling you on a video game. This sold us on an experience. Now, it's sort of to say that what was called, I sort of look at Rockstar when they put out this game, they were like Jonathan Crane in The Dark Knight. It was like, buyer beware. I told you my game would take you places. I never said they were places you wanted to go.
Yeah, that's true. That's great. That's a great way to look at it. Yeah, I mean, it's a hell of a game. And, I hope you enjoyed watching this episode of the All-Time Gaming Series. Andres, do you have anything real quick you want to say?
No, it's one of those games that if you're curious about it, I would never dissuade anybody from playing it. I would just say, again, buyer beware when you go into this game. It is not necessarily a terrible game. It is a very, very topical game. It is also just a game that it's a time capsule game for me more than anything else. It is one of those where anytime I play it, it brings me right back to where I was playing that game so long ago and the other shock of going through this. So I would say it is a worthy game to play. It is definitely a worthy game to talk about almost 20 years later, because again, you have to look at what this game gave to us. And in fact, if you look at it as it just gave us the violence, it also made video game companies more aware of the kind of violence that they were putting out in games. Like, I know Grand Theft Auto 4, they had to basically change up certain things in the dialogue to make sure that folks didn't get the wrong interpretation of what was going on in the game. So all that has to be attributed to Manhunt in some way, shape, or form. And to experience this game, check it out, see where you fall. If anything, if you hate it or if you love it, it always leads to a very great discussion about where this game fits in the pantheon of video games.
Absolutely, 100%. So for the All-Time Gaming Series, I'm Steve Cravens. That's Andres Gallego, a.k.a. Galleghost. This has been Manhunt. Happy hunting. We'll talk to you next time.
See you later, you other psychos.
Had to add it, didn't you?
Oh my God, I've had an accident. I'm serious, man. You brought me off. None of these guys ever went to Nam, but you sure as hell gave them a taste tonight.